This is episode 82 of That Shakespeare Life. This episode is brought to you in part by Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App, the only audio Shakespeare pronunciation app, which is designed to remove fears about how to speak Shakespeare's language so that his plays are accessible to everyone. Find out more about this app in today's show notes and stay tuned after the episode for how you can learn more.
Hi, I'm James Alsop, Shakespearean researcher and teacher of English based in Exeter, Devon. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
The reason that it was in rhymed verse is that these plays were being played outdoors, and it's easier to hear a rhymed verse and understand what someone's saying.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
One of the aspects of Shakespeare's plays known for causing the most eye rolls in a class for beginning Shakespeare students is the concept of Iambic Pentameter. For many other students, myself included, however, it is precisely the short lines, rhyming words, and systematic beat to the sound of the word in Shakespeare's plays which causes them to enjoy Shakespeare's works in the first place. I think Kenneth Branagh demonstrates the meter best when he tap dances to Iambic Pentameter in the film version of Love's Labour's Lost. The bard's metrical approach to word choice and phrases in his plays allows the words to flow off the page and onto the stage or into the dancing shoes of some Shakespeareans with a skill very similar to that of a musician, learning how, when, and how long to hold a note when playing a musical score. Not only are pauses important for Shakespeare's lines, but we can see even in the stage directions of his plays that often the very action on the stage is influenced by what Shakespeare chose to write for a particular character. The development and use of iambic pentameter in theater is unique to the time period when Shakespeare was writing, and it turns out that iambic pentameter has its own role to play in each of Shakespeare's productions. Actors in Shakespeare's theater, like Richard Burbage or Will Kemp, had to learn where to place their emphasis and pauses, just like Shakespearean actors do today. Our guest this week trains just such actors in this particular skill, and she's here today to walk us through the history of Shakespeare's iambic pentameter. Ann Younts is Associate Arts Professor at New York University's Tisch School of Arts, where she teaches voice, text, and Shakespeare classes in the graduate acting program. She also teaches complete voice and speech program in New York City. In addition to the voice, speech, and text work, the advanced level includes applying these tools to the texts of Shakespeare. She has coached productions of Shakespeare for the New York Public Theater's Shakespeare in the Park, All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Macbeth, and Hamlet, and the public's off-Broadway production of several Shakespeare plays as well. She was the voice coach for the Guthrie Theater's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, and Antony and Cleopatra, and the voice coach for Romeo and Juliet for Westport Country Playhouse. Ann has served as voice consultant and dialect coach for Broadway on production of Clybourne Park, Newsies, Bonnie and Clyde, Mary Poppins, The Lion King, Mamma Mia, Spamalot, and Tarzan, and off-Broadway productions of Storefront Church, The Duchess of Malfi, Edward II, and many others. She is the founder of Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App, the voice app that lets you take a professional voice coach with you in your pocket with playable audio guides to all of Shakespeare's words built right in. Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App is a sponsor of That Shakespeare Life, and you can find more information about Ann and the app inside today's show notes. Hello, Ann. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Where did Shakespeare learn how to write an iambic pentameter?
Well, there's no record of Shakespeare's schooling, but most scholars believe that he attended, there's a local grammar school in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is still there. I've actually visited it, that he would have studied Latin and Greek there. Now, what's interesting about the Latin to me is that he would have read Ovid, and Ovid shows up in many of the plays. He uses different parts of it. He also probably would have attended the medieval miracle plays, which were stories based on the Bible. They were still being performed in Coventry. And Coventry is about 20 miles from Stratford-upon-Avon. So those two things would have influenced him. We don't have any record of exactly what his schooling was or how he learned how to write in iambic pentameter.
Why was writing in verse important for these plays?
The verse was the style of the times, and all of the playwrights wrote in verse. Ben Jonson, Thomas Kidd, Christopher Marlowe, they all used iambic pentameter structure. And the big reason is that, from my point of view, is that it was very close. Iambic pentameter is very close to the English language. And I can talk about that more in just a moment. But that is the style of the time. That's how people wrote. Since we're talking about iambic pentameter, I should mention what a regular line of verse is. A regular line of verse is made up of 5 metrical feet, and we're alternating unstressed and stressed beats. So the rhythm is did-dum, 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 did-dum. You can hear how strong that is. What does that remind you of? Da, 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 da,
like
da, da.
Horse's hoofbeats.
It does sound like a horse, absolutely. The other thing is that it sounds like a heartbeat. Da dum da da. If you've ever listened to a heart,
it does sound like a heartbeat.
And that's the power of the rhythm. That's the power of it. And once an actor or a reader feels that regular rhythm, then they're going to feel when the rhythm changes. And these changes are often clues as to what is going on in the action of the play. And I can talk more about those in just a moment. Let me just give you a couple of examples of a regular line. So here's one. I'm going to read the rhythm first. If music be the food of love, play on. You can hear how strong that is. It's absolutely regular. Now, if my actor was saying that, they're not going to read that rhythm, but it's there. It's in their bodies. If music be the food of love, play on. And you can hear the rhythm is still there. Another one from a speech in Julius Caesar is, a curse shall light upon the limbs of men. You can hear da 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 da. Again, the actor would say, a curse shall light upon the limbs of men. But we hear the rhythm, even though he is saying it, making it make sense. And one last example is in As You Like It, I pray you do not fall in love with me. I mean, you could almost dance to it. It's so rhythmical. But she says, I pray you do not fall in love with me. So those are regular lines. Once the actor feels it in his or her body, then they're going to notice the changes. Let me give you one example of a change. So here's a change that we were just talking about, the regular line. This is when the meter reverses. So we just did unstressed, stressed, right? A curse, I pray. Here's the opening line of Richard III. I'll read the rhythm first. Now is the winter of our discontent. And the actor would say, now is the winter of our discontent. So that very first foot, as he walks on the stage and says that, is going to be stressed. Another example is Constance in King John. The first line in her scene, she comes in and she says, gone to be married, gone to swear a peace. So she would say, gone to be married, gone to swear a peace. She's furious about what's happened, and Shakespeare has given her this strong beat to start off the scene. This is called a trochee, stressed and then unstressed. I feel like it's jarring to the line, both for the actor to investigate it and for the audience to hear it. In some speeches, it gives an urgency to the beginning of the line. It changes the pace from the da-da, 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 da-da. Very helpful for the actor and the reader to know about these changes.
I had a science teacher in school that, just to be funny, he would always use the phrase, you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And I remember that phrase not for the science associations he was using it for, but because it helps me understand Shakespeare. I think as a student, we like to think that that teachers are making this up somehow, that there's not really emphasis on different syllables. But when you change where we put the emphasis on normal phrases, you can see exactly what you're demonstrating here, that yes, in order to teach you this, I am slowing down where I put this emphasis so you can hear it. But there is a emphasis in regular spoken speech. So while you may not be paying attention to it as an audience member, when you analyze these plays, you can see where Shakespeare was paying attention to it as a writer to include these subtle differences. It's pretty neat.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And that example of putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable is fairly common. I mean, I've heard that before, and it's perfect for talking about the meter of Shakespeare. My theory about Shakespeare, and it's only a theory, is that he just sat down and wrote, that this is in his body. He knows how to write these. I don't think he went, let's see, I want a trochee here, I want something else here. That's the way he wrote. How many of the plays he wrote in a very short period of time? Not a lot of time for rewriting. Does that make sense? Right?
Yes. Well, it absolutely makes sense, because I think even if I'm writing notes about this podcast, for example, I'm not necessarily consciously thinking through the detailed grammatical rules that I am applying. So we can look and apply the rules of iambic pentameter to Shakespeare as well.
Yeah.
I've read that the specific meter of iambic pentameter came originally from the French, specifically 12th century troubadours of Provence. Acknowledging the 12th century was much closer to Shakespeare than the 12th century is to us today, how did this rhyme scheme become popular in England? How did it make that jump from France to England?
Well, I'm not sure I can talk about how it made that jump, but I do know that from about 1150 in France, all of the plays that were written in rhyme. Now, that's different from Shakespeare and some of the others we're going to talk about. But in this period of time, my understanding is that the reason that it was in rhymed verse is that these plays were being played outdoors, and that's where they were performed. And it's easier to hear a rhymed verse and understand what someone's saying. And that actually makes sense to me from the few performances I've seen outside that were not mic'd. Now, the meter at that time was quite different. It was often lines of 14 syllables. So it was called Iambic Pentameter. That's a verse line of 7 feet. How it went from France to England and changed into the 5 feet, I don't know. I mean, I know a little bit about the sonnets coming from Italy and stuff, but that transition, I'm just not familiar with.
Iambic pentameter does follow this specific format we've been discussing. And I think that leads to an expectation of rigidity, that it has to be this one way. But in addition to the trochee you alluded to earlier, are there additional variations with iambic pentameter?
Yes, there are a lot of them, but one of the most famous ones is called a feminine ending. And this is, some 18th century person made up this title. But what it is an extra unstressed syllable. So you have your regular line, and then you have this extra unstressed syllable. So let me give you some examples, and then I think you'll hear what it does, and we can talk about it. So it's interesting. Portia, when she's talking to Julius Caesar, I'm going to read the rhythm of this. She says, "It will not let you eat or talk or sleep," regular. "And could it work so much upon your shape," regular. Now listen to this, though. "As it hath much prevailed on your condition," there's our extra unstressed syllable, right? Now, is there anything wrong in his behavior or strange in his? Yeah, he's acting like someone she doesn't even know anymore. So it's interesting that Shakespeare has put the word condition, or he's given it that extra unstressed syllable. I'll come back to that in a second. One of the most famous speeches in all of Shakespeare starts with 4 feminine endings. To be or not to be, that is the question, that's feminine. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer, feminine. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, feminine. Or to take arms against a sea of troubles. I'm a little bit splitting between reading the rhythm and the sense. So you're playing Hamlet. You need to figure out why Shakespeare gave you those 4 feminine endings at the beginning. I don't think it's an accident. There's something going on there. For me, what the feminine ending does is, or one thing it does, is it breaks that regular rhythm. You could even go so far as to say it undermines it, like in the Portia line. She's going along, da-da-da-da-da-da, and then condition jumps out at you. Also, I tell the actors, it's often helpful to look at the word that has a feminine ending. This doesn't always work, but here's a couple of examples. There's a line in Richard III, we know he's deformed, where Richard says, that laid their guilt upon my guiltless shoulders. Shoulders is a feminine ending. Is there anything wrong with his shoulders? Yes, he's deformed. So it's interesting. I don't think you have to do a big thing with it, but it's interesting that that's the word. Iago, almost in Othello, almost every time he talks about that he's honest or that people call him honest, it's almost always a feminine ending. And there's basically nothing honest about Iago. So I just think it's interesting that that's pulled out, right? So that's a huge difference from the regular line that Shakespeare uses, I think, to great effect.
You mentioned earlier that iambic pentameter mirrored the English language. And I wonder, is iambic pentameter something Shakespeare employed as a prop on stage for the actors to do what you're saying, to alert the audience to these problems or to indicate that something's wrong? Or was this an example of the normal speech pattern in 16th century England and their accents and how they spoke?
I wouldn't go so far as to call it a prop. I would say it is a choice. It's a choice of the playwrights of that period. And I can give you some more examples in a moment. Christopher Marlowe is often credited with making iambic pentameter popular. You know, that's what scholars say that have written and investigated, right? But people on the street did not speak in verse. And I think sometimes, I think because people are so familiar with Shakespeare or read Shakespeare or other plays of the time, they start to think that's how they talk. But they didn't, they just talked. But as I mentioned a while ago, the iambic pentameter is very close to the way we speak. An example of that is if you say big black bear. Actually, just say that with me.
Big black bear.
Bear. Okay, so that's 3 solid words right after the time. But in iambic pentameter, it would be the bigger, blacker bear. The second one just flows. Can you feel it? The bigger, blacker bear. That's iambic. And that's the way you and I actually talk to each other. We alternate stressed syllables with unstressed syllables. So they did that back then. They did it 400 years ago. It simply is the way that we talk. So the iambic is really, really close, and it worked for the playwrights to use it of that time.
In a write-up for Sydney Theatre Company magazine, Mike Bartlett claims that sometimes there's an action on stage which Shakespeare specifically includes because, quote, the meter serves that purpose, end quote. Do you agree with Mike Bartlett that iambic pentameter actually influences the actions of the actors on stage?
Well, I haven't read the article, but 2 things that I think he might be talking about. Some actions in the play are literally written into the verse, literally in the words. Brabantio says to Desdemona, "Come hither, gentle mistress." So the actor needs to move closer to him, right? That's in the text. Or in All's Well That Ends Well, Helen says, "Then I confess here on my knee." So clearly she goes down on her knee, right, when she's talking to the Countess. The other thing that's possible that he's talking about is the space in the verse for an action. A good example is when Iago is trying to figure out what to do to Othello, he says, "And will as tenderly be led by the nose," talking about Othello, "as asses are." So that line is, "as asses are, bump, 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 bump." There are 3 feet of silence. And then Iago says, "I have't." So that space there has given Iago, or the actor, time, just a fraction of a moment to say, "Oh, I know what I'm going to do." And then he says, "I have't." So there's lots of examples of that in Shakespeare. I'm not sure that that's what he's talking about, but I think those spaces are very important, and for the actor to be aware of them.
I know as a voice coach, you work with actors who are performing Shakespeare or preparing to perform Shakespeare's works all the time. And is this meter something that is often a stumbling block for actors approaching Shakespeare?
I have not found that to be true in my experience, but I think the reason for that is I always start with explaining the verse structure, really what we're talking about now, what's a regular line, what goes against it. And actors are eager for the clues that are in the verse. They want to know what they are. And so, it's like knowledge is power. So the more knowledge that they have about the verse, the easier it is to work on and enjoy, quite frankly. We also, both in workshops or in my voice and speech classes, we do a lot of exercises that have to do with getting the verse into the body, physicalizing the images or moving at the end of the verse line, lots of things like that. So my experience is that they enjoy working on it with verse. And it's different than, doing a TV script or a movie script or something.
Why do you think more modern plays don't continue this tradition of writing plays in verse?
I don't know. The only thing I can think of, and I have no idea, is that it's not easy. If you're trying to write something with using the regular lines, say it was Iambic Pentameter, which it probably would be, if somebody's going to write a play and then try to do it in verse, I think it would take double the time, triple the time. I don't know. There's little spots here and there of plays written in verse, but it's definitely rare. Yeah.
Do you know when this meter fell out of fashion?
Well, as far as I know, all of these plays were being written in verse until the Restoration, which is the late 1600s. At that time, then people like William Congreve, who wrote Love for Love, The Way of the World, he was writing not in verse, but in prose. But every now and then he would put an iambic pentameter couplet at the end of a scene. Same thing happened in the Relapse. Van Brugh would also put rhyming couplets in, but it was really going out of fashion. And from then on, as far as my research shows, that from then on, plays were written in prose for the most part.
So it really is kind of a slice of Shakespeare's history to have it be in iambic pentameter.
Absolutely. It's a huge slice. Yes.
Many people blame their struggles with understanding Shakespeare's plays on iambic pentameter. As a professional voice coach who's this expert in Shakespeare, do you think the metered rhyme scheme of the lines increases or decreases its readability?
Well, I would say from my point of view, it definitely increases it. I do think it's helpful, which I was talking about before, working with actors on exercises and understanding the techniques of verse. But I do think it's helpful to know that. But you don't need to be a Shakespeare scholar to understand the plays. I remember talking to a child who was in 3rd or 4th grade, so I think that would be 8 or 9 years old, and she told me that her class was doing Shakespeare, and she liked it. And I was, what? I was a little surprised. And then I said, well, what is it that you like about it? And I'll never forget this. She said, well, it's fun to say, and it's funny. And the play they were doing was The Comedy of Errors. But that's an 8 or 9-year-old saying it's fun to say, because children like rhymes. They like to say them, right? And so it's interesting. She was no Shakespeare scholar, but she already liked Shakespeare.
That was similar to my first exposure to Shakespeare. I was about that age, and that's exactly why I liked it too, because he was the first writer I came across that had rhyming lines, and it was funny. That was what I took away from it too. So that little girl, this girl after my own heart. Oh my goodness.
I know. And she was that's so little, 8 or 9. I was like, what are you doing at school? But that's
wonderful.
That's the power of Shakespeare. Well,
I know we would love to learn more about this topic. What are some of your favorite books or resources that you can recommend for us to learn more?
Well, for me, the best, absolutely at the top for anybody who's interested in this, is a book called Shakespeare's Metrical Art. And it's by George T. Wright, Wright. And it's a book that I've gone through when I'm preparing, a workshop or, talking to people about it, about verse, or I will go back to and read a chapter. It's so thorough. And I don't think anything else is in its category from my point of view. So that would be the one I would recommend.
Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Well, I love this question. And all of a sudden, I'm imagining myself on an island with all of the time, to read the Bible, which I love, and to read the complete works of Shakespeare some more, which I love. So that's fantastic. Strange. I was thinking about, is there some novel that I would reread? But you know what I came up with? I hope this is fair. I would take the dictionary, the absolutely unabridged dictionary with me, because I could never get bored, right? You just start with the A's and work your way through it. And I just don't think you would ever get bored with a dictionary.
What an inventive choice. I like that selection very well. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, two things. I am a voice and speech teacher, and I'm starting I teach at New York University, but in addition, I have my own private classes, and I'm starting a new class in a couple of weeks. And that's a class that's voice work, speech work, text work. And the advanced part of the class is applying all of those techniques to Shakespeare, monologues from Shakespeare. And in addition, professionally, I'm the dialect coach for a production of The Young Man from Atlanta by Horton Foote, which is playing at the Signature Stage here in New York City. So I start that in about two weeks. That doesn't have anything to do with Shakespeare. That's Texas. I'll be working with the actors on a Texas dialect, which I actually love doing, right? That's in a couple of weeks.
Oh, well done. Well done. Well, that sounds very exciting. And Shane Ann Younts, we appreciate you stopping by the studio today to visit with us and help us explore Iambic Pentameter. This has been delightful. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it was so much fun for me. Thank you, Cassidy.
To join us in this conversation with your thoughts about Iambic Pentameter, and especially if you have stories about teaching this to students or your own stories of acting, learning, and speaking in meter, please share those with me because I can't wait to hear them. Check out today's show notes. Not only will you find a place to share these stories, but there is extra history on the development of the IM, Christopher Marlowe, and why he's credited with making that popular, and links to the resources Shane Ann recommends for you, all packed inside the show notes at CassidyCash.com/episode 82. That's CassidyCash.com/EP82. When I first started studying Shakespeare, especially as an American, where the English language is very different on this side of the pond than where Shakespeare was writing, I often mispronounced some of the words that you find in the plays. Like originally I said Gloucester instead of Gloucester. Well, that's why I downloaded Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app. It's an easy-to-use, straightforward app that you can download to your phone or tablet on iTunes as well as Google Play. And it lets you search any word from Shakespeare, and then it tells you exactly how to say it with a playable audio guide built right in. Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app is like having a professional voice coach that you can carry in your pocket. Explore all the features of this app and download it right now at CassidyCash.com/Shakespeare app. That's CassidyCash.com/Shakespeare app. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.